The Philadelphia 76ers have not gotten off to the start to the season that they desired, but the NBA trade deadline waits for no man and no team. So as talks continue to heat up, they have been connected to an interesting name as Grizzlies forward Santi Aldama appears to be on the trade market. I want to break down what he would bring to this Sixers team, my overall thoughts on even making a move with the state of the current roster, and overall what a difference that it would make, what the mindset behind making a move like this would mean for the Sixers. So let's dive right into this, and I do want to start off with what sparked this video was an article on Bleacher Report titled "One Trade for Every NBA Team," and for the Sixers specifically, it has them connected to Santi Aldama. As far as the terms and conditions, the mock trade that they came up with was the Sixers bringing back Santi Aldama in exchange for KJ Martin and 3 second-round picks. That would be a 2027 and a 2028 of the Sixers' possession, as well as an additional 2027 rounder via the Milwaukee Bucks. And the write-up for the trade overall states, one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA, Aldama is quietly having a really good season for Memphis. 13.0 points, 7.3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, shooting 38.6% on three-point attempts. At 6'11", he'd bring some much-needed size to the power forward position in Philly and instantly become a glue guy who fills all the gaps for the stars already in towns. If the small market Grizzlies don't feel they'll be able to afford to re-sign Aldama this summer, the 76ers should call and make an offer for his services. So to dive into exactly what he brings on the floor, after his most recent performance, averaging 12.7 points per game, 7.0 rebounds, 2.8 assists, also did want to emphasize that 0.9 steals per game, has some pretty active hands in the defensive passing lanes there, shooting 50.1% from the floor, 39.1% from three, also 44.4% from the corner there. A pretty interesting pathway as a player. He went to Loyola for college, which is not a school that is accustomed to turning out NBA talent. They are very much in the lower tier of that, but a guy that has outperformed expectations every step of the way and rightly carved out a pretty comfortable role for himself. Now, where this conversation gets interesting to me is when you bring in the contract. Sort of my position on making a trade for this Sixers team has shifted throughout the season, that this is not an all-in push year. I see zero evidence to support that this team, what we've seen, the product on the floor, is ready to compete at the highest level. So with that being said, the trades that I have my eye on are really setting up for next year. If you can bring in a guy that you can snag for multiple years of service at the deadline, where you can have this half season kind of get him acclimated and then build off it for next year, it makes sense to me. But that is not exactly the situation with Aldama there. And to touch on his contract exactly, that he is in the final year, which was a team option there, making still not great money, and a guy that $3.9 million on the cap overall there. But what I would bring this in to say is I think it's directly related to the Gershon Yabusele conversation. Now, Yabusele, to his credit, continues to outperform expectations in a major way. Truly has been the most consistent and the biggest bright spot on the Sixers team from just about start to finish this season. And it does feel there is a pretty significant risk that he walks away in the offseason. By making a trade for Santi Aldama, you can kind of double down. They are not the same as players, but they share a lot of similarities. And why I say that, they're very much glue guys. That while Yabusele is not quite as high of a level of passer as a guy like Aldama, they're guys that will knock down the three, have legitimate size, and can play that small ball five in addition to that power forward position. I think Aldama, a more willing shooter is the better way to put it. Yabusele's numbers have been just fine from beyond the arc this year, and he has certainly increased his willingness and the rate of his release as the season has progressed, which has been really exciting. I don't want this to be taken by any means that I would prefer Aldama than Yabusele. For me, plan A and the biggest priority of this offseason should be finding a way to keep Gershon Yabusele for next year. I do think he's a picture-perfect role player for this Sixers team and really any contender in the NBA. But the reality is it's pretty likely that he is going to be priced out of what the Sixers can afford here. That can bring in the conversation if they should be more sellers and trying to look ahead to carve out a lane to sign him in a contract. But honestly, a lot more of this has to do with he's in a unique spot based on his pathway. As he came to the NBA, spent 2 seasons with the Celtics. They renounced his rights. He was not picked up by another NBA team, went overseas, and then obviously the Sixers brought him back next year. So typically when you think about the pathway for a player, there's sort of set barometers for the way your contract accelerates and grows, but based on the years that you have in the league, years of service, all these kind of factors that play into things. Yabusele doesn't really have that kind of set standard because of the unique path that has been the case. And the biggest hurdle that the Sixers are going to have to clear in this is not being able to sign him a certain percentage over his previous contract. He's going to be worth more than the minimum or the maximum that the Sixers can offer him in this spot. There is a chance they can carve out some sort of lane, such as a mid-level exception, but it is looking like the top dollar number that they could offer Yabusele would be $5.7 million. And frankly, I see plenty of teams I expect to spend more than that on Yabusele. So if that is the case, that is where we start to have these Aldama discussions. And that is a guy that I think won't have quite as high of a price point. He's still going to be a desired asset and a guy who's carved out a decent role for himself in the league. It's kind of interesting when you look at his stats overall, pretty variable in how he's been used and what his role has been. There have been stretches where he served as a consistent starter on this Grizzlies team. There's also been stretches where his level of opportunity has been extremely limited. That even looking at the 2 years from last year to this year, kind of side by side, played 26.5 minutes per game last year, started 35 of the 61 games, 25.1 minutes per game so far this season. So about a minute and a half drop off there. He's also only started 11 of the 34 games that he has been available. But with that being said, the stats have been better in a smaller sample size, in fewer minutes. He is outperforming his numbers based on his points, assists, and rebounds, and the shooting percentage, a career high 39.1% from three. Although it is a little bit smaller sample size there, he attempted 5 threes per game last year compared to 4.4. Regardless, the shot is good enough for what the Sixers would need him to do. The biggest appeal in Aldama to me is him as a connective passer, that he is a guy, and one of the biggest problems I think we've seen in the Sixers team is the lack of playmaking in the half-court setting. That Tyrese Maxey has not taken those necessary next steps to be a true floor general, while Joel Embiid is capable of orchestrating an offense in that half court. He frankly has not been available nearly enough this year. And Paul George, while he is a creator and can get shots off for others, I thought he's done some in stretches, has done a nice job attacking the basket and kicking his shootings on the perimeter to shooters on the perimeter. He is a guy that is not known for his playmaking prowess either. So bringing a guy like Aldama would be a nice connective piece to kind of loop this together. He's a pretty low usage player that he does not need the ball enough. He's got a kind of a unique release on his jump shot, but you know what? It goes down at a high enough rate, so I would be okay with this. This would be an interesting conversation to have. This basically entirely depends on the cap logistics, and I could not get a straight answer diving into things. I'm pretty confident they would have a higher chance of bringing back Aldama than it would be Yabusele, but you kind of got to get a guarantee that this would be a player returning next season if you are to take that type of swing. And also, by the way, while we've talked about KJ Martin being this human trade chip for the entirety of the season, I don't quite feel as concretely about that now that the season has played itself out. For starters, KJ himself has had some really nice flashes on the floor. I know he's missed the past several weeks due to the foot injury that he sustained, and I do think that increases the likelihood of him being traded, as he simply has not been around, and especially disappointing for KJ, as he had just really carved out a consistent role for himself in the Sixers team. For KJ specifically, he's a lot of things that Aldama is not. He's athletic. He's a guy that can get up, rise above the rim. He's smaller than Aldama, a couple inches shorter, but is a guy that can play that small ball five. Frankly, his verticality at the rim is really impressive on the defensive end as well. I do think he has some really nice instincts as far as coming across with the weak side blocks, helping out as a shot blocker, and he's an absolute terror in transition, which is probably going to be the number one lane that he makes an impact in the rest of his NBA career. So while I'm, understand the concept and really why KJ was signed in the first place was for this flexibility to make that final move and get that final piece, there's nothing wrong to me with allowing him to play out this season. He will have an option or the Sixers have an option on his contract for next year, and then you can do the same exact dance. Maybe showcase him a little bit down the stretch. He'll be an expiring contract next year, and we can kind of have that same leverage point where he could be the trade chip then. For the Sixers team as a whole, I thought at this point of the season we could say we can find our missing piece, that you can play out up until the trade deadline and then have a clear look at what is this team missing to truly take them over the top. I don't think we have anything close to an answer about that. We have not consistently seen this team play together as constructed, and that is where these conversations pretty much start and finish for me. Until you can see a consistent sample size of how Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, and Paul George look together on the floor and what the needs around them are, I have a hard time pulling the trigger on just about any sort of deal at this point. So I would love to dive deeper into the cap logistics and figure out if Aldama is a guy that could be likely to be retained. It does not feel like there is this overwhelming belief that he's a long-term piece of this Grizzlies team, and frankly, they have a ton of good young talent that I believe that they're going to be, higher on the priority for making sure they stay in fold there. So it will be an interesting name to keep an eye on, but I don't think the Sixers are quite in the spot that we expect them to be at this point, ready to take that swing. And while power forward was circled as such a clear need coming into the season, I think Yabusele has held down the fort just fine and really decreased that need. That at this point in time, I would argue playmaking is probably a bigger need within the Sixers team as a whole, having a guy that is not 45 years old being capable of running an offense. Shout out to Kyle Lowry there, and finding a way to kind of fully make this piece together. So we'll see what happens from there. I do think that there will be some trade talks heating up in the coming weeks. It feels like the Sixers have to do something. We haven't heard or seen from Daryl Morey in months, really, since the offseason when things were going well. And obviously, the train is off the tracks for how this season is going. But regardless, we'll see how things play out. Do want to hear from you guys in the comments your level of interest in Santi Aldama. For me, I'm pretty much fully on the stance of if you can guarantee retaining him for next year and signing him, I would pull the trigger on that type of deal. That he is a guy I think is a winning player and can help a contender, but I don't think the Sixers are quite in the driver's seat for being one trade away for being actual contenders this season. So will be interesting to see how things play out from there. But as always, appreciate each and one of you guys tuning in the video. Make sure to smash that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.